There are several things to consider when you plan to upgrade an existing version of SQL Server. The material I'm going to cover here is a simplification of all the options and limits. You'll definitely want to see Microsoft's extensive documentation about upgrading for all the gnarly detail. One thing to consider are the upgradable versions. You can upgrade SQL Server 2008 and later. If you're running any other earlier versions of SQL Server, you'll first have to upgrade it to one of those versions, SQL Server 2008 and later, before installing and upgrading to SQL Server 2016, which is really going to complicate your upgrading of the database. Another thing to consider is upgrade paths. The available upgrade paths for various editions of SQL Server may limit your options. In general, you're limited to upgrading to the same or similar editions of SQL Server as the earlier version. For example, you can only upgrade from SQL Server 2008 Enterprise Edition to SQL Server 2016 Enterprise Edition. So you'll want to see the supported version and edition upgrades in the SQL Server technical documentation for more information, and frankly, way more information. There's a lot to consider in there. And then another consideration is backward compatibility. Microsoft always takes backward compatibility seriously when releasing new versions of products. But an upgrade to a new version of SQL Server is likely to break a few things in your existing databases and applications. You may experience dropped features, changes that are likely to break existing code, and behavioral changes that are likely to produce different results. Now, there won't be many of these, but I almost promise you, I almost guarantee you that the ones you do find will be insidious, that you'll have to rewrite some code. But the good news is that Microsoft provides lots of information about what is likely to break. So you'll have to review and update existing code to accommodate these backward compatibility changes. Further, some features change in each new version of SQL Server, and others have been deprecated for removal in a future version of SQL Server. So you'll want to see the backward compatibility topic in the SQL Server technical documentation for extensive lists of both of these types of features. And in general, you'll want to pay attention to the list of deprecated features in the current version of SQL Server you're using, because those are going to go away at some point. It may be in the next version, it may be 2 or 3 versions down the line, but you don't want to start using any deprecated features, start using them for the first time. There is one handy trick that you can use. If you don't want to upgrade a SQL Server database from a previous version, you can set the compatibility level option to run the database in SQL Server 2016 as though it were running in the previous version. So the idea here is that you can install SQL Server 2016, continue to use the database as though it were running in the older environment, say SQL Server 2012, because there's some feature that's changed that you can't accommodate right now. So what you can do is you can set the compatibility level option to 90, 100, 110, 120, 130, or 140. So those different values correspond to 90 is for SQL Server 2005, 100 for SQL Server 2008, 110 for SQL Server 2012, 120 for SQL Server 2014, 130 for the Azure SQL database, and 140 for SQL Server 2017, the next version. And the way you do this is you execute an altered database statement to set the compatibility level for that database to whatever version number that you want to retain that database as. And if you do use the compatibility mode for an earlier version of SQL Server for a database, you'll not be able to add queries that take advantage of new SQL Server features because the database isn't going to understand how to process that, say, new transact SQL statement. But it should be compatible with any applications or T-SQL code that assumes it's running against an older version of SQL Server. And then another thing to know if you're writing .NET applications against SQL Server. So if you're connecting to SQL Server using the .NET Framework data provider for SQL Server, sometimes just abbreviated SQL Client, you can set the type system version keywords in the connection string to one of several possible values. So I have an example of type system version equals SQL Server 2012, but you can do it for 2008, 2012, 2014, or 2016. And you can also set the type system version equal latest to access the latest version of SQL Server. And when you set this value to an earlier version of SQL Server, the type system for the earlier version is used, which can affect data type conversions. So for more information, once again, you want to see the documentation in the .NET Framework help for SQL connection string, because that's where it has the information about defining your connection string. Now, one of the biggest mistakes you can make in migrating existing SQL Server databases is to assume that after the upgrade, your code is going to run and produce results exactly as before. There's an excellent chance they won't. So this is a good time to review existing databases and their code, as well as data access code in client applications, to clean it up and accommodate changes produced in the new version of SQL Server. This does complicate the upgrade process, but doing careful work here is going to save you many, many headaches trying to get everything working again. Fortunately, Microsoft provides an Upgrade Advisor tool that you can use to find and highlight many of the issues that you'll face when upgrading. So the name of this tool is Data Migration Assistant. Earlier versions of SQL Server included what was called an Upgrade Advisor tool that helped prepare for upgrading existing instances of earlier versions of SQL Server. It analyzed those instances and its installed components and produced a report on the issues that you should address before upgrading to SQL Server. Really helpful tool. But the tool was replaced in SQL Server 2016 with a new feature in the Data Migration Assistant tool. So now a single tool will assess your existing instances of SQL Server for upgrade and help you migrate your data forward. And frankly, the tool looks a lot better too. Now, in my experience, the Data Migration Assistant does a good job of identifying the issues that you should address. But it is a mechanical tool that isn't very smart about unusual situations. So you'll still need to do your own work to review your databases and to thoroughly test your applications after upgrading. The easiest way to obtain and run the Data Migration Assistant is from the SQL Server installation media. So here I have Windows Explorer open, and I have the installation media installed in a DVD drive, which is the D drive on this particular machine. And I'll go ahead and run the setup program. This is the same installation program that you'll run in order to install SQL Server itself. It takes a couple moments for it to start up. And here we have the SQL Server Installation Center. So as you can see, there are a lot of resources for planning the installation. And I'll talk later about some of the other options on this. But the one I'm interested in now is this Download Upgrade Advisor. Now, the first thing to notice is that it's calling it the Upgrade Advisor. But if I go to this link, that'll open up my default browser and take me to this page where I can download the Data Migration Assistant. So the link says Upgrade Advisor. We get the Data Migration Assistant, which is what we want. Okay, so I'll go ahead and save that. Always a prudent thing to do rather than running things directly from the internet. I think I clicked on it. There we go. And as you can see, Windows does a security scan. It's finished downloading. And now I'll go ahead and run it because the system has had a chance to scan it. Okay, so we'll go through the setup process, accept the license terms, and I agree to the privacy policy and install it. Okay, so you can see that that's a fairly painless installation. I'll minimize these. And it automatically puts this icon on my desktop for the Microsoft Data Migration Assistant. Now, you can also find the Upgrade Advisor as part of the SQL Server 2016 feature pack on Microsoft's website. And that'll always be the most recent version. Now on that download page, it's also still listed as the Upgrade Advisor, but the page the link takes you to is for a preview version of the Upgrade Advisor and says that the tool is deprecated and replaced with the Data Migration Assistant. So hopefully at some point Microsoft will take care of that inconsistency and talk about just the Data Migration Assistant, because that's the tool that you want. Okay, so I'll go ahead and run it, because running this is really pretty straightforward. Now I started it from the icon here, but it's also on the Start menu now as part of the SQL Server 2016 installation. So you can start it either way. You get to the same place. And then I want to click on the plus icon here in order to create a new project. So I get this new panel, which lets me define that new project. So I'll start by entering a project name. I'll be really clever and call it My Project, but generally I'm going to want to give it a more meaningful name indicating the server instance that I'm evaluating. I can set the source server type. The only option is SQL Server. And the target server type of the default is Azure SQL database, but in this case I'm interested in SQL Server 2016, so I'm going to select that option there. And then I'll go ahead and create the project, and that opens up this My Project page. Okay, so from here I can define what server I want to use and look at what I want to analyze. As you can see, I can select two different report types. One is to check the compatibility issues, and this is the one in this context of upgrading SQL Server I'm most interested in, because I want to know what kind of breaking changes have occurred, such as features that are deprecated or now removed in whatever version of SQL Server this database that I'm analyzing is coming from, say SQL Server 2012, whatever. But then I also have this option here of New Feature Recommendation that is kind of a nice tool for discovering new SQL Server features that apply to the databases and tables and how you're using those within the current database. And it might be a nice way to discover new features. Just be careful that you need to, if it recommends a new feature, you need to use an edition of SQL Server that supports that new feature. And not all do. So just be careful on that. If you're only using the standard edition of SQL Server 2016, that's the destination server that you're going to be migrating to, then you have to be careful that it doesn't recommend an enterprise edition feature. Okay, so once you do that, you can click Next. And here's why I'm not going to proceed any further, because basically the steps from here on are going to be highly dependent upon the version of the database that I'm analyzing and the features that are implemented within it. But basically where you go from here is you enter the server name of the server that you want to analyze, and then select the authentication, because you need to have administrator level access to that SQL Server instance. And then from there you connect to that database. It runs the analysis and then provides what it really is a very detailed report with a lot of great information about what the problems are that it found. And be aware too that the process can take some time depending on the size of the database that you select and the network latency between you and that database. Obviously, if I was running this against a database on this local machine, that's not going to be an issue, but it could be across the network. A lot of data being analyzed. If the report is long and complex, it could take some significant amount of time. Okay, but then the end result is the reports that you selected that include information with pretty thorough descriptions of the issues and how to solve them. It really is a nice report that you get at the end of the process.